Hello, I'm Tiffany Thompson, Director of Marketing at IMS, and today I'm here to introduce today's topic, the theory of core values. In this conversation, we will explore a framework developed over decades of trial work that helps lawyers understand what truly motivates jurors in the deliberation room. Joining me today are Chris Ritter, Senior Jury Consulting and Strategy Advisor, and Adam Bloomberg, Senior Client Success Advisor. If you're watching the recording of this video, please like and subscribe to this channel. Guys, over to you.
Hey, thanks for the intro. We're here today to drill down on a theory I've heard you talk about repeatedly, and that's the theory of core values.
Right.
What is core value? What are core values?
Well, core values and the theory of core values are something that I've developed, the last 20 years or so. Core values are those values that motivate us. They're the values that make us act, right? I say that, and we'll talk about this later, what they are. They are what, if you ran the universe, if you could be the person who was in charge of everything, they would be the values that you would use to judge, to make decisions, and to be motivated to act. And that's what we're getting that's what we're getting jurors to do.
Okay. So how did you come up with this theory?
Well, it's actually a very interesting, it's somewhat tragic story. One thing that I've learned about core values is that core values are easier to identify the more tragic a case is. Now, I should tell you, core values exist in civil cases, they exist in criminal cases, they exist in the most mundane cases, UCC filing cases. Think of whatever it would be the most mundane case that you could have, and my apologies to the UCC lawyers. But the easiest way to look at them is to look at the most tragic case. And the most tragic case that I've ever worked on was a case that took place about 20 years ago. And I began to see that there were patterns that were emerging, but this is where I really saw them and I could identify them for the first time. It's a tragic case about a woman who had profound schizophrenia, who drowned her 3 children. I think they were ages 4, 6, and 8 in the bay. And unfortunately, none of them were ever found and were presumed dead. But she had profound schizophrenia. When I would talk to people about this case, and I was part of the team that was trying to determine and try to convince the DA that we should not prosecute her, but she was prosecuted for first-degree murder. We had to defend her on a not guilty by reason of insanity. And when I would talk to people about that, and again, this is an incredibly tragic case, I found people had reasonable, really quick explanations of why they were willing to go one way or the other. So I start to talk to people and I say, why do you think that she's not guilty? And they'd say, well, it's clear, fairness. Or they would say, she is guilty because she's not taking personal responsibility. So this extreme case led me to understand what they were. They've expanded over the years. I started off with either 5 or 7, depending on it. And I'm now up to about 11. And hopefully they don't get too many more. I think I've pretty much figured out what the universe is.
Okay, so why don't you walk us through the 11?
Sure. And as I do, I think it's important for you to recognize that these core values, although there are 11 of them, they don't always arise in every case. And not everybody has all 11 of them. We'll talk, I'm sure, about how you go about identifying them. But I also want to suggest to you that it's easy to understand them if you think about 3 parts of the body. You think about the head, you think about the heart, and you think about the gut, which are not coincidentally those 3 areas that we tend to think of that we rely on, the brain, the heart, and gut reaction. So in the heart we have compassion. Compassion is, I describe as a third-party emotion. You're looking out and you're looking in on somebody and you're feeling a sense of wanting to do something to help them. Empathy. Empathy is different than compassion. Empathy is a first-party perspective. It's I would have done or I would not have done the same thing. And then you've got fairness. Something is fair or not fair. And that is a major factor that affects a lot of jurors on how they come to a conclusion. Then there's the concept of mercy. Now, you don't see that often in a civil case, but you will you'll occasionally see that in a criminal case. And the notion of mercy is one of those things where somebody admits that they've done something wrong, that they could in fact be punished, but they're looking for the jurors to effectively exercise discretion and not impose they'll still probably be found guilty, but it won't be the the most severe of the charges that's being brought against them. So then let's switch to the brain. The brain uses two of the core values, science and checklisting. So let me explain what I mean by science. Science is the willingness we have to defer to somebody who we believe has got an objective, better informed opinion than we do about something. And it's the objectivity that we're deferring to. Now, science has taken a lot of hits recently, but I also find it fascinating. My brother and I do not agree on a lot of things. If you asked us about COVID, we'd never agree. But we'll cite the same core value. We'll cite science as the reason that we're coming up with that. And then checklisting. Checklisting is one of those ones that exists in every single case. Checklisting are the people who want to know what the law is, and they go through and they check the boxes. And you can see them almost going through that. Now, I want to stress, checklisting is one of those that the judge will enforce. The judge will not say to people, please be fair, or, please exercise mercy. But he will or she will say, it's your duty to apply the law. And applying the law is a form of checklisting. And I should point out that checklisting is not just law. It can be things like the contract or something that imposes requirements. Science, as I said, is also one of those things that requires the use of the head and the brain. Now, I want to switch to the gut. Common sense, let me just list them. Common sense, personal responsibility, prejudgment, self-interest, and vengeance. Common sense is another one the court endorses. In common sense, they say to you, don't leave your common sense at the door as part of the jury instruction. Common sense is a practical way of describing, in many ways, circumstantial evidence, taking something and developing an extended explanation from it. Personal responsibility is also in the gut. That's one where people will accept responsibility for what they're doing or won't accept it, and that has an effect. Prejudgment, prejudice, those are things that you will obviously, you can imagine they can be positive or negative impressions. Self-interest, somebody does something because they think they'll benefit from it. And vengeance, the whole notion of really wanting to punish someone, usually in a criminal context, for having done something really bad.
I'm sitting here thinking about this, and I can hear defense perspectives and themes and plaintiff's perspective and themes. How is this different from Reptile?
Well, the reptile theory is a theory that you often hear people throw out. It's usually provided by the prosecution, or the plaintiff, as a way of trying to convince people to act. It appeals to that reptilian part of the brain, which is motivated by fear and motivated by some of the really coarse emotions that we feel. I think it's valid, but the problem I have with the reptile theory is I don't think it's nuanced enough, right? I don't think that it accounts for some of these other things like fairness, like compassion, like checklisting. So I don't disregard it, but I do think that the theory of core values is a much better and more nuanced way. And I think it also provides for the defendant a really good way to counteract the reptile theory, appealing to these other things such as checklisting and appealing to fairness and mercy and things such as that. So I do think that they both exist. They exist side by side. I think mine's a little bit more nuanced, and I think it provides a lot more for the defense than a reptile theory does.
So with your 11 core values
Right.
here, how does the typical trial attorney make practical use of them?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, you have to understand a couple of things. Not every core value exists in every case. And not every person has all 11 core values. We tend to have more than one. I tend to be a checklister because I'm a lawyer. A lot of lawyers are checklisters, but I also I'm a checklister who believes in fairness, and to some extent somebody who applies the concept of personal responsibility. One thing you have to do, and the practical way to do this is in mental minding, is to list these things. I literally write all 11 down on a board. So think of that as a middle column. And on the left, I put plaintiff or prosecution. And on the right, I put defense. And I force us to go through each and every one of these and say, if you're the plaintiff, would you rely on this core value? And if so, how would you do it? If you're a defendant, would you rely on it? And when we're done, we have a number of these checked off. Some of them both sides are going to be relying on. Sometimes only one side's going to be relying on, sometimes the other side. That gives you a fundamental basis for thinking about who do I want in my jury? What kinds of core values do I want? And what kinds of arguments do I need to raise? I want to stress you're not arguing all of these in the alternative. You don't say to someone, please be fair. If you're not fair, can you please have compassion? If you can't have compassion, do checklisting. But you're recognizing that certain cases will trigger these core values, and you need to make sure that you provide, as part of your presentation, the elements that allow people to rely on them, to basically use them, and hopefully come out in your favor.
All right, last question.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got core values. How does that fit in? You got another theory, active jurors. How does that play in with active jurors?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's understand that when a jury comes to a conclusion on a verdict, they are not agreeing necessarily on how they got to that verdict. They're agreeing on the verdict itself. They're agreeing on the answer to that, right? So the active juror is the person who is making a transition from being a neutral finder of fact to somebody who is endorsing one side or the other. They have powerful incentive in order to argue that their side ultimately prevails. The opposite of an active juror is what I call the I just am juror, the one who can't explain why they're voting away. I just am voting that way. Their vote counts. It counts as much as the active juror. So the active juror has to find ways to not only convince themselves, often based on the core values, but then be able to find and harness other core values to convince people, whether they be other active jurors or I just am jurors, that they too want to end up at the same place. So there are often tools that the active juror will use to get people, all 12 or all supermajority, to end up with a verdict that allows you to ultimately prevail.
All right. Well, appreciate your time as
It's always
always.
good seeing you.
Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
Yeah.